All right, so here is my module 5 for 805. It's about trauma and social emotional learning. My name is Nikki Actipis, and I know we didn't have to do a video, but I felt compelled to because that's the teacher in me. So yeah, so let's get started. So just to start off with, I wanted to define what ACEs are because when we talk about traumas, and specifically when we're talking about school-age kids or school-age individuals, excuse me, um, we often talk about or we often think about what affects specifically younger humans. I work with teenagers, so by the time they get to me, they've um, had several years to experience ACEs. And ACEs are adverse childhood experiences. And these include but aren't limited to abuse, neglect, witnessing violence in the home or community. Um, and so those things can be like physical, emotional, sexual abuse, neglect as emotional abuse or emotional neglect or physical neglect, such as maybe parents not giving the time and attention to a kid to all the way down to not providing the basics, such as a safe place to be. Maybe they might witness domestic violence against a guardian or even themselves, or even within just like the community. Um, so, such as, you experience a neighbor going through domestic abuse, or you see cops coming into your neighborhood and harassing people, and so on and so forth. So, these experiences can have long-term and generational effects. So long-term effects such as health issues for the individual, psychological issues, um, and these can be passed down through generations. So as a scientist, I often think about epigenetics of passing down those um, ACEs from parent to child, whether it be because our genes are influenced. And um, I think that's important to realize when we talk about nature and nurture, um, that our experiences as human can be passed down to our kids, and kids who experience traumas themselves can then grow up to pass down those. Um, so a lot of folks might think that ACEs are not common. They are pretty common. Um, as of 2021, it has been said that 61% of adults in the United States that were surveyed reported at least having one type of ACE. So it didn't specifically state which types. So this is just across the board. And nearly 1 out of every 6 of those adults surveyed had four more types of ACEs. And I can personally say from my experience, I have four of those. I have four ACEs, or I can put down that I have four ACEs. So I fall into that 1 in 6 category. And so ACEs can lead to toxic stress, which means you're always in a state of stress. That's not great because there is good stress and bad stress. Still has the same effects on the body, but this is like being poisoned. Your body is being poisoned by traumatic experiences. And these toxic stress can interfere with developing healthy brains, a healthy immune system, a healthy hormonal system, and can alter our DNA expression. So long of the or short of long is it can really interfere with not just your emotional well-being, but also your physical well-being, potentially shortening your lifespan. So I just want to put in this chart because I thought it was super relevant to just demonstrate exactly, what's happening here. So abuse may look physical, emotional, or sexual. Neglect can be physical or emotional, and household dysfunction, such as maybe you have a guardian experiencing mental health issues. Maybe you have relatives that are incarcerated, which can be a guardian or somebody in your immediate family. Could see your mother being treated violently, and that could fall under, you could see them being treated emotionally, physically, or sexually violently. Maybe there's substance abuse in the home, and this is not just your what people might typically think of as street drugs, but maybe somebody has a chronic pain condition that's managed with opioids, and that becomes an addiction, which becomes substance abuse. And maybe there's divorce. Maybe there are guardians splitting up, parents splitting up. It doesn't necessarily have to be super violent divorce, but as we all know, or as we've come to learn, that divorce can negatively, if it's not handled well, can negatively affect adolescence in the home. So when doing the research, and then also just thinking about my personal experiences with my students and my colleagues, I really want to think about not only just the impacts on our students, but also the staff, because we were all kids once, right? And we are also having to deal with students who come in that have ACEs or are currently experiencing the ACEs, right? Because they're adolescent. And we now get to deal with those. So from being on the teacher side, it's really important for us, and I'll speak for myself, to understand our own ACEs and our own coping mechanisms of how we got through them, or how we are currently getting through them as adults, because those are going to really impact how we interact with our students. I work with a vulnerable population. I'm in KCK PS. We have a lot of immigrants. We have a lot of community violence that happens. We have a high poverty rate. So being somebody who kind of matches or has come from that background of low socioeconomic status, having witnessed violence in my youth, it's really important for me to understand how those affected me, so I can better serve my students. And then acknowledging that our students face these things, because ACEs can and they do impact how students learn. So they could come to class, they could be extremely tired because they were up all night hearing somebody fighting, or maybe they had to go to work because another adult in their family has lost their job, or they're not making enough in the home. So that can impact their learning, right? Or maybe they have outbursts in class because there's no outlet at home to handle their emotions. It can also impact how they interact with each other. So our school currently has had a whole heck of a lot of fights break out this year. For a while, it was at least one a day. So, those tensions, if they're not knowing how to deal with what's happening inside their own brains, and they meet up with somebody else who has the same problems going on or similar, situation in their brains, it's really going to impact how they interact with their peers. And then it's going to impact how they interact with us teachers and other staff. Because if, I come into work and I remind a student of somebody at home that has been abusive towards them, or has said some not nice things or whatever, just because I didn't do it doesn't mean they're going to recognize that, that could be a trigger, right? So not only does it affect students' mental health, but it can affect their physical health too. So maybe they're fatigued all the time, or maybe they constantly get stomach pains or headaches, and that can lead to long-term health conditions. So I want to put in here what working towards healing looked like. So after doing some research and then for this project and also just in general as a scientist, uh, this all made sense. So we can't really discount positive interactions youth have or adults have, because yeah, we all experience some sort of trauma um, in some way, shape, or form, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we're all going to have really poor coping mechanisms. So by building healthy relationships with adults and peers, um, students can bounce back better. They can manage those traumatic situations a little bit better. They know they have a safe place to come to. And it really helps build resilience. And by building that resilience, it can be healing for the students and for teachers. Because like I said earlier, teachers were once also students, and we have to deal with students that have these ACEs, right? So when I think about questions as far as dealing with student traumas, two of my big ones are, what is the level of confidentiality I have as an educator with my students? And how do I advocate for my students? So when it comes to confidentiality, we have a pretty good, or we are working towards a pretty good mental health system in my school. I can't speak for a whole school district because I work in a bubble. That's how it works. So being able to build like confidentiality, like how much I tell social workers, how much I tell the counselors, how much I tell the admin team or other teachers, because we all want what's best for the student, right? But if some level of confidentiality isn't kept, you're going to end up not, that positive relationship you're building with the students going to be broken down. And I would have to say, like, our counselors are pretty good at that. They're just like, hey, what's going on? They don't just like, oh, well, so-and-so said X, Y, and Z is happening at home or whatever. And as of right now, I've never had a student who was like, well, I found out that you referred me to the counselor and I'm mad at you. I'm never telling you anything again. Because our names aren't given out, which is nice. And our social workers are just good at their jobs. I know our admin team sometimes is like, well, we wish the counselors and social workers would tell us more. I'm like, no, I just need to know if a kid's having a rough day and like if there's anything specifically I need to do or not do. I don't need to know the details unless that student's going to come tell me. I think that's part of building autonomy for teenagers. I don't need to know your business unless you're going to tell me it. And I don't need to tell other people your business unless you let me, unless you are in immediate danger, then I'm going to tell somebody, right? And thinking about how I advocate for my students. So like, as most educators, it's like walking a tightrope on how much can you confront, I guess confront's not a good word, but how much can you communicate with the guardians of students, because maybe a student is trans and they've experienced trans violence at home, or they've overheard X, Y, or Z, and there's not good about wanting to come out at home. And it's a delicate line about talking with parents about that, being like, hey, like your kid's gay, just stop being a homophobe, because that's going to probably lead to more traumatic experiences at home. So I'm personally working on how I advocate for my students and building relationships with their guardians and all of that. And so as far as modeling some social emotional skills with students, I would break down, after doing some research and also just thinking about it, about how my school district does this. So I would say breaking these SEL skills down between classroom/school, family, and communities. So in the classroom, it might look like classroom meetings. It might look like journaling emotions or having talking circles or whatever happening. Having a school-wide curriculum, so it's something that's not just I'm focusing on, and making sure the kids I see every day get some sort of social emotional learning, but making sure like it is a school-wide thing. Having peer mediation, so training kids how to mediate between their peers, because that can also later on be translated into family mediation or community mediation. Um, and just daily greetings. So even if you don't do them within your classroom, just greeting students by name, um, having conversations with them as they come into your room or come into the building at the first thing of the day, or leaving at the end of the day, saying like bye so and so, have a good day, or bye, whatever. Really reinforces those connections of like, I think about you even when we're not specifically learning. As for promoting social emotional learning with families, inviting families to conferences, including parents and guardians in the conversation of like, hey, like your student is having these troubles and they really want to talk to you, but they really want to mediate it because there's this tie-in between schools. Involving parents in schooling in general. So even when students aren't having, or when they're having a good day, calling in or texting and being like, hey, your kid's having a really good day. This is what happened, And so when they get home, when the kids get home, the guardians can be like, oh man, I heard you had a really great day. You want to talk about it? And they can be proud of it, be like, oh, somebody thought of me, right? And then utilizing social workers, not just in the school, but like getting families involved, because sometimes kids only bring the symptoms of whatever's happening at home to school. So tying that together, being like, all right, we're not going to lose this whole family in the system. And then as for communities, because our kids eventually go out into the community, right? And they're part of the community. Teachers were part of the community. I live near my school. So promoting community outreach programs, such as right now we've got COVID vaccine programs going on. We occasionally do blood drives, whatever that students run, and community members can come participate in those. Holding health clinics. So I'm fortunate enough to where my school has a health clinic, and those services are not only just available to our students, but their families and extended families, and they can come in if they need meds. We can find out where to get those meds, get vaccines, whatever. And then also just doing community meet and greets. So this one's a little bit trickier, but for me, it's more like being present in the community. So I live in the community. So going and being seen in the community, grocery shopping, or going to athletic events, or just like community trick or treat events, whatever. And participating in those, encouraging students and their families to participate in those, and represent our school, represent themselves. And that's about it for my slides. So overall, before I close out here, so I'm part of the trauma team at my school. We are currently working on a whole bunch of stuff. We are currently looking at getting safe places on each floor lined out, so kids, if they're having a meltdown, can go and just like have their meltdown, be in a quiet space, obviously within the proper parameters of like teachers can still have their eyeballs on them, all of that stuff. And then also just working with teachers and talking out their ACEs as well, and their current traumas as adults. So my heart was into this project because of that, because I'm involved in it at my school, on the trauma team, and also just from a personal perspective. So thank you.